On February 24th, 1933, gangsters gunned down Dennis Ziegler here in Chicago. Ziegler died in his son's arms. He leaves behind 11 children and his wife, Edna.
I'm Lissa Morgans, and you're listening to Call Edna. Previously on Call Edna. When we left off, we had Edna's list that she gave the police in 1933 to solve Bruce's murder. First, we have William Maloney. Then we have John Lynch. And then we have Lloyd Little. Bruce alleged that they were illegally involved in his union's takeover. There's no indication that they would have carried out the hit on Bruce himself. So I wanted to see what leads the police had in 1933. The three members of Al Capone's unit, starting with Sam Alex, he's a known Capone gunman. Public enemy number one at the time, Murray Humphreys. And that brings us to Fischetti, who was once Al Capone's chauffeur. And now we have one cop and one state's attorney who seem suspicious, Captain Daniel Gilbert, who is a dirty cop. And that brings us to Thomas Courtney. He's the other half to the Gilbert machine. And I think they solved his murder in February of 1933. But they didn't tell anyone. So what are our next steps? Want to know their connection to Bruce and his union in the 1930s. There's one piece of information I haven't told you yet. And that's that there is a violent threat that I found from two of the members on the list towards Bruce. Episode 3, The Brotherhood. Welcome back to Call Edna. When we left off, we were discussing the list. And now I want to dig into Bruce's union, local number 569, to see what exactly was going on underneath the surface at that time. But first, we need to talk about two of the men from the list who made threats against Bruce's life almost a year and a day prior to his murder. And those men are William Maloney and John Lynch. On February 23rd, 1932, Maloney and Lynch chased Ziegler through the street in the area of the Board of Trade building in downtown Chicago. And Ziegler escapes by running towards Jackson Boulevard and getting in a taxi. As he's getting into the taxi, one of the two men allegedly yell at him, quote, "You son of a bitch, I will get you yet." The taxi driver then asks Bruce, quote, "Are these guys fooling?" And Bruce said, quote, "Fooling hell. Those guys are really out to get me." And I went along with my dad, Gary, to walk the route that Bruce took. But Gary also wanted to talk about ATMs, so bear with me.
It used to work that way, remember?
I had to eat my card once.
Yeah, you could do that. You could just forget. You could just leave your card there, get your money. But now you can't get the money without taking your card back. That was one of the best inventions ever.
The ATM?
You gonna go in?
We can go in. We're gonna walk where the chase happened.
Oh, where the chase happened? Okay.
Yeah. So he came to Jackson. So we can walk it in reverse. That's fine. So this is where he came out and got in a cab.
It's cold down here in Chicago.
Oh yeah.
I think it's probably flurrying up there.
It's stunning. This is where it happened. Gary, you want the full story?
What's that?
Want the story?
Yeah.
So he was in that side, and he was being chased.
By
and
whom?
So, who do you think?
Maloney.
And his secretary.
Ah, okay.
The two of them chased him, and he came through here to escape. And he came out to Jackson, and he got in a cab, and they yelled something like, "I'll kill you yet."
Did they have guns with them? Do you know?
Not part of the account. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, this is where he came through.
But he came. Was this? I assume this. Was
This was built.
Overhang thing built back then?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so he came out right here and got in the cab right here?
Yeah.
Interesting. He probably didn't ride in very many cabs.
I don't think so.
Yeah, he was a streetcar guy.
Bruce documented this incident apparently with the name of the cab driver who picked him up. And after he's murdered, almost a year and a day later, someone from the police apparently confirms this account, and the taxi driver confirms exactly what Bruce said happened. If you're thinking like I am, this account is pretty sensational, and we owe a lot to Bruce for his record keeping. Although the journal he kept in his office was not recovered, this story was, and it was able to be properly documented outside of the missing journal and missing police record. And not only was it documented at that time, it was documented again in a more sophisticated way in the late 1950s. The source I quoted from was the official testimony of a man named Clarence Donath, who was in Bruce's Union beginning in 1923 and later joining Local 150, as he testified to this account before the United States Senate. And I think this is a pretty big deal. This is a death threat that's more than the calls that Edna received on the phone. This is a realized actual account. And I was curious if Clarence himself worked alongside Bruce and the anti-amalgamation efforts that were going on in the late 1920s and early 30s. And I was also curious if he had any additional connections to Maloney, Lynch, and Little. So let's dive into Bruce's Union. Let's see what was happening during the amalgamation effort and what exactly transpired. How did Local 150 take power? And is there anyone else we need to add to our list? I mentioned in episode 1 that there was an injunction that Bruce helped to get in the Chicago court system to stop the amalgamation effort. And I was able, with help, to obtain a court record involving an injunction with Bruce's Union. But I'm not sure it's the same injunction I was referencing in the first episode, because there appear to be multiple injunctions involving Bruce's Union in this course of time. I also found a Tribune article from February 15th, 1930, mentioning an injunction. The injunction I mentioned in the first episode was reported in a Tribune article from May 11th, 1931. And what we have here is a court case from 1929 concerning an injunction from April of that year. So it's possible there were up to 3 injunctions that I found. But this injunction, this court case, is the earliest reported, and I'm guessing the first in a years-long effort to stop the amalgamation process. Most of the following information on the history of Local 569 is from the judge's orders, as I find the contemporaneous filings on this to be the most accurate, but I'll also use some newspaper reporting as noted throughout. In the mid-1920s, operating engineers in the Chicago area were represented by at least 3 major local unions, and they're all under the head of one larger union, the International Union of Steam and Operating Engineers, whose then president is Arthur Huddle. And those 3 unions are, first off, Bruce's, Local 569, the Hoisting and Portable Local, and it's important to note that this is a jurisdictionally limited union. So it originally was part of Local Number 69, and then in or about the year 1900, 569 is formed and limited to the territory of City of Chicago. There's also Local 42, a steam shovel and dredgeman's local, and then there's Local 464, a steamrollers engineers local. And you've probably picked up on, given the date of this court case, that the Great Depression is settling into the American economy. And there's not enough work to go around for all of the workers in these unions. I tried to discern exactly how many union members were in Bruce's Union at this time, and I came up with 2 figures. It's either around 400 men or 750 men. According to an affidavit of the then president of Local 569 in these court filings, he says the union has about 750 engineers. But other filings within the record and newspaper reportings say there's likely more, around 400. The difference between these two figures isn't that much for Bruce's case. It's a couple hundred men. And according to the president of Local 569, there's a couple of goals that they share in terms of unionizing. Quoting, their goals are to elevate the craft, achieve a higher rate of skill amongst its members, cultivate friendship, assist each other in employment, reduce hours of labor, secure higher wages, and better sick and death benefits. End quote. To me, this is an incredibly wholesome representation of what workers would want for their workplace. I mean, I don't think you can really fault the goals that the union stated they had here. They want to increase their rate of skill amongst the members. So they want to improve the trade by improving their own skill set. They want to cultivate friendship. This one I thought was so sweet. Navigating friendship in the workplace, I think, is very difficult, but work is always better when you're doing it with people who you like, value, and are friendly with. Assisting each other in employment, the other goals like reducing hours of labor so that they wouldn't be overworked, securing higher wages in parallel with making their craft and skillsmanship better, and obtaining better sick and death benefits, which makes sense at a time when many of these men were likely supporting wives and family in their households. So if they were sick or unable to work because they've died, it's extremely important that their families would be left with benefits. And another big part of being in a union at this time is membership in trade associations. So Local 569 is a member of a couple of large organizations, like the Building Association of Chicago, the Chicago Contracting Team Owners Association, the Hoisting and Portable Engineers of Chicago, and my personal favorite, the Sewer, Tunnel, and Water Pipe Extension Contractors of Chicago and vicinity. And this is where our competing narrative begins. On the one hand, the International Union, under Huddle, stated that he wanted to limit jurisdictional disputes between locals and increase the union's collective bargaining strength by merging them together at this time when jobs are more scarce during the Great Depression. On the other hand, Huddle was interested in consolidating his own personal power and resources through men he personally backed in order to achieve a higher level of power for himself. And it's noteworthy that this was not a phenomenon that's unique to Chicago. Huddle is doing similar efforts across the U.S. In New York, one example is the Stationary Engineers, local number 403. And other cities that are having these issues are Detroit, Boston, L.A., St. Louis, and D.C. And it's not just Bruce's union who speaks up against what Huddle begins doing in the late 1920s and early 30s. According to the Chicago Tribune on May 4th, 1930, quoting, "The paving engineers severed affiliation when Huddle tried to enforce his famous supervisor plan, which deprives the rank and file of locals of voice and selection in their union representatives. It is also said Huddle picks out a lieutenant and a local and then confers on him the authority to run the business affairs as a lifetime occupation. At the present time, numerous locals of engineers in the country have procured injunctions to restrain Huddle from enforcing his one-man rule," end quote. And that's exactly what he tries to do in Bruce's union. And I'll note, he does it successfully. So beginning in 1929, through the International Union of Operating Engineers, Huddle tries to amalgamate or combine local number 569 with local 42. And local number 569 is very opposed, and that's because they operate in different jurisdictions. 569 is limited to the city of Chicago, and there's more work in the city. So although around 150 men are unemployed at this time in the union, this is likely a higher rate of employment than places outside of the city. So if they combine with local number 42, the rate of unemployment in the union would go up without really work to be added to their plate. And according to another Tribune article on February 15th of 1930, They call Local Number 569, quote, the strongest and wealthiest group of hoisting engineers in the country, end quote. I didn't find another source that really talked about this, but it does seem relatively accurate that the resources that 569 had were more vast than others in the area and possibly the country, and they were worthy of protection to the individuals working in the local. Because again, 150 men are already out of work, and that's considered a good local at this time. I'm pressed to think of what a bad local looks like during this time as unemployment begins to rise. And that brings us to the lawsuit. And the lawsuit records we have are from the spring of 1929, beginning with the injunction in April. When I started this podcast, I wasn't sure how in-depth I would go into my legal background. But in this episode, I'm so glad I have it, because reading through old court records is not the easiest process. Legal writing has come a long way since 1929, when so many of the court cases involved saying aforementioned and henceforth and heretofore, and a lot of extra language to make the law, in my opinion, less accessible to the average reader. Now in the law schools teach clear, concise legal writing, and that the best form of writing is the one that uses the least amount of words to state the point the best. So even for me, going back through this old style of legal writing is somewhat unbearable. In the lawsuit, the complainant is listed as Walter T. Spikings on behalf of Local 569. Complainant is just similar to a term like petitioner or the individual bringing the action. In other lawsuits, this is sometimes called the plaintiff. And the responding party, the defendants, have quite a list, but I'll just mention a few for our purposes, and that's William Maloney and John Lynch. Notably, Little is not included on this list. Then we have Arthur Huddle, of course, and a man named Edward Moore. And I felt the need to mention Edward Moore because something I noticed in this lawsuit is that some individuals who are mentioned as defendants are actually on the complainant's side. So although they're listed as defendants, they may not be as antagonistic to the interests of the local itself, but they have been asked to carry out something that the complainant believes to be illegal. So in the example of Edward Moore, at some point there's a split in allegiances between Moore with Maloney and Huddle, and he goes and sides with the union. And this makes sense. I saw court papers signed by Moore that were filed on behalf of the complainant. And I found this with other people as well, such as secretaries, treasurers, other executive members of Local 569 who have maybe been ordered by Huddle to do something that's against the local's interests. So even if those individuals didn't want to do it but complied in one way or another, they're listed as defendants. And that's important to remember, that maybe everyone on the defendant list isn't actually antagonistic to an individual like Bruce, but was ordered to carry out something against the union's interests. And the complainant files for an injunction in Chancery Court in Chicago. Chancery courts are derived from our Old English judicial roots, and they're considered to be civil courts that deal with issues of equity or lower-level civil disputes. So think about land disputes, trusts and estates, things like that. I thought Chancery courts were totally done, but there are a lot of states that still have them. And in fact, Cook County has a Chancery division of their circuit court to this day. And the allegations are largely based on the amalgamation efforts to combine Local 42 into Local 569, and then eventually put all those members into Local 150. And it's clear that Huddle is the puppet master of this amalgamation project. First, he tries to work within 569 to take it over from within. Think about that newspaper article. He would place one person, one lieutenant, in the local to try and consolidate power. And the person he places as supervisor of Local 569 is William Maloney. Maloney was previously a business agent of 569 for almost 5 years, but there's a big deal in appointing him as a supervisor. And that's that according to the union constitution, supervisors are to be duly elected and not appointed. So by Huddle placing Maloney in power in this way, he deeply offends the members of Bruce's union. And the members of 569 vote as to whether Maloney should be thrown out of their local. And the vote is 400-1. The sole vote is Maloney, voting that he shouldn't be thrown out of the local, which I love. I think that is such a classic characteristic of Maloney, that he's going to vote for himself regardless of what anyone else says. So when Huddle gets this feedback from Bruce's union, he takes a pivot, and he decides to create Local 150 as part of a systematic shift of power because he realizes he can't infiltrate Bruce's local. So instead, he's going to transfer all of the power, jobs, everything from Bruce's union to Local 150. And he does this in a couple of ways. First, he revokes 569's charter and Local 42's without a hearing. So they're no longer a chartered local. Second, he tries to abandon their property rights by ordering that their books, their physical property, and their charter funds be transferred to Local 150, including any funds in the union treasury. And the court papers state that around this time, Local 569 has about $12,000 in their treasury, about $240,000 in today's dollars. This really perturbs union members because they believe they have a protected property right in this treasury fund as the dues-paying members of the union. Third, Huddle appoints loyal members to positions of power in Local 150, aka our main man, William Maloney, becomes the international supervisor of the new Local 150. Fourth, Huddle tries to sever all business and trade association ties that 569 had, and they allege that he did this in a, quote, cunning course of conduct and shrewd manipulation and centralization of power. And the last main way that Huddle transfers power, the fifth way, is by reallocating Bruce's locals contracts to 150. There's not enough work to go around, so the little work that you had in the span of one night is now evaporated and sent to someone else. This is clearly a tactic to get the workers to then come over to 150 in order to maintain their livelihoods. And Maloney is Huddle's most loyal servant. In the lawsuit, his role is charged as, quote, for the purpose of intimidating, threatening with deposing and expulsion the duly elected officers as aforesaid of said local union number 569, end quote. I'm trying not to quote too much from the lawsuit because you don't want me to say aforesaid a million times. But I liked this one because it's very clear he's a man who's there to intimidate. And in the lawsuit, Bruce's union also asked Maloney to return his union car, which is something I didn't know existed. But apparently, as a prior business agent with the local, he was given the use of a Cadillac and $125 a week plus expenses, which in today's money is about $2,300 a week. Maloney also takes over the office space of local number 42, which is located at 332 South LaSalle Street, which is right next to the Board of Trade building. And one of Maloney's biggest plays is that he threatens to take away the death benefits afforded to Bruce's union, and those benefits were a big deal. And this is apparently where organized crime gets involved. Quoting, to help him organize his local 150, Maloney relied on outlaw and gang-dominated Teamsters unions, which pulled men off jobs and less engineers working there joined Maloney's union, end quote. So this is labor racketeering in a nutshell. We have someone who's in organized labor now involved with organized crime in order to centralize and consolidate power. And I assume once they consolidate power, they would then have an exchange of payments between the both of them. And you may be thinking, how possibly could Bruce's union stop this? And they bring a variety of claims, but it's important to reiterate that this is an injunction. So they're not seeking a specific amount of money or anything like that. They want the behavior of the consolidation, the amalgamation process to stop. And the basic claims are as follows. They allege a violation of union constitutional provisions, kind of similar to a breach of contract, or if you're thinking in the business world, a failure for the board to follow its own bylaws. And they say that amalgamation is not provided for in the union constitution, and that the Constitution provides for the voting rights of its members, and so it's strictly unlawful to force a union member to vote a certain way or to preclude them from voting at all. And they're also very concerned about their meeting rights. Once again, according to the Constitution, they have the right to meet once a month as an organization, and that's another thing that Huddle disbands. And they do not hold back against Huddle in their allegations. Quoting, Arthur M. Huddle, as General President, in carrying out his policy of dictatorship of the International Union of Operating Engineers, thereby reducing its members to serfdom and slavery, to his wishes and commands, end quote. The words used in this lawsuit at this time really indicate how intensely these individuals were feeling about this process. They also allege that he has a propaganda campaign in order to get people on his side. Another issue is over property rights, and that would be in contracts and also the death benefit fund. And the complaint is also rife with general allegations about the course of conduct conducted by Huddle, and it's that he's waging a campaign through threats, intimidation, and general blackmail tactics. And the judge agrees with Bruce's union. The union wins an injunction. An injunction is issued against Huddle and all the defendants listed from enjoining them from doing or continuing to do this amalgamation behavior. But after the court rules in favor of the complainants and enjoins Huddle and others from doing this behavior, Huddle continues to amalgamate the unions and consolidate power. So this leads to more litigation and likely those additional injunctions that we mentioned at the beginning of this episode. And he does that through some very interesting letters that are preserved in the court record to various members of Bruce's union demanding that they carry out his demands despite what the court has ordered. I find these letters to be fascinating because I think it's really indicative of how Huddle conducted his course of business and also how much he did not care for the judiciary and what they said. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. The first letter is addressed to Matt Borwick, the financial secretary of Local 569. Starting off, Dear Sir and Brother, quoting, yours of April 22nd at hand and contents noted, and in reply, the records in this office show that the members of Local Number 42 have transferred into Local Number 569, and that was before any court action was taken or injunction was applied for, and the list of members that you received was received prior to any notice by the courts, and the orders of the General Executive Board automatically transferred these men into Local Number 569. That action was completed before anybody petitioned the court to stop it, and there is nothing else for you to do except report them in here as accepted into Local Number 569. And in the case of the orders of the General Executive Board, it needed no action by the members of Local 569. With kindest words, I am fraternally yours. Signed, A.M. Huddle, General President, end quote. So this is the stance that Huddle takes in response to the injunction. He says he doesn't care because in his opinion, all this happened before the court enjoined him from doing anything. So he's free to do as he wants, and everyone should complete the amalgamation as directed. But it appears our secretary, Mr. Borwick, is not as convinced as Huddle would like him to be. So Huddle sends a follow-up letter. This letter is longer, so I'll just read sections from it, quoting throughout. Dear Sir and Brother, I have lately been informed that Local Number 569, by a vote or resolution, has taken concerted and united stands against carrying out the orders of amalgamation with Local Number 42, blah, 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 blah. The refusal of Local Number 569 to obey this order of amalgamation must be regarded as treasonable to our organization and to the cause of unionism. The defiance of Local Number 569 has created an emergency, blah, 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 blah. And I now, as General President of the International Union of Operating Engineers, revoke the charter of Local Number 569. And I also revoke the charter of Local Number 42. And there's more, but we'll end there. So really what Huddle said in his first letter wasn't true. Although he believed the amalgamation process to be done, it's very clear it's not done. And he needs some level of action from the actual individual members of Bruce's union in order to carry out his plan. So instead of obeying the court order, he revokes their charter, which is something they follow up with in the courts. And there's one more letter in the record from May 8, 1929, this time directed to James Conroy, Secretary, to the Chicago Building Trades Council. I'll paraphrase in this one as well, quoting, Dear Sir or Brother, under date of May 7, 1929, Charter of Local Union Number 569 was revoked, and this extinct local union is no longer entitled to a seat in the Building Trades Council of Chicago. A new charter is being issued for the hoisting and portable engineers engaged in construction work to be known as Local 150. And upon arrival of this charter in Chicago, this local union will be instructed to immediately affiliate with your council. The members of ex-local union number 569 who apply for transfers in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution of the International Union of Operating Engineers, upon approval of the General Executive Board, will be entitled to membership in Local 150. Blah, 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 with kindest regards. Fraternally yours, A.M. Huddle, General President. End quote. So this is where we see Huddle make his full pivot. He believes that the courts have stopped him from amalgamating Bruce's union with Local Number 42, and he sees this as an opportunity to then transfer power into a new Local 150 created by him. And this makes sense as to why there's so many injunctions throughout the years concerning Bruce's Local, because they fight this process just as much as they fought the process against Local 42. So I'm not surprised that there's an injunction here in 1929, maybe another one in 1930, and yet another in 1931. And something also from these lawsuits and these letters that I found really interesting is that Bruce is not listed as the secretary at this time. In fact, he's only listed once in the lawsuit as part of a committee of leadership from Local Number 569 that goes to D.C. to protest what's going on. It's led by Edward Moore, and there's other individuals involved. Thomas Smith, James Lynch, and Dennis Ziegler. Given the date, I would have thought that Bruce would have already been secretary of his union. But in fact, there's two other secretaries listed, and neither of them are Bruce. So apparently he becomes union secretary after this process has begun and after he goes to D.C. This was surprising to me because I imagine Bruce as someone who was already on the executive board of his local at this time, which means he became secretary after the amalgamation process started. And I think that takes a lot of guts. He wasn't already in the job. He goes into the job knowing what it entails. And that speaks very highly of Bruce's character, and that's because of his belief in a free union, one not controlled by Huddle or Maloney or the rest. I looked for the man's name from the testimony at the beginning of this episode, Clarence Donnet, in the court documents, but I didn't find anything. He wasn't listed as someone in leadership at this time, and he wasn't otherwise present in the lawsuit itself. But I did find something interesting about him in the 1950s. Around the same time he gave his testimony before the Senate, Local 150 was having its first election since Maloney and Huddle started the operation, 29 years prior. That's right, and that election is held in October of 1958 between John Crane, the man who had been appointed to power by Maloney, and his opposing candidate, and that's Clarence, noted as a progressive candidate who is challenging the dictatorship of Maloney and his men. I like to think of him as the Bruce of the next generation. While Bruce's life was cut too short, it's clear that other members of his union didn't give up hope, and almost 29 years later are still running against Maloney and his men. And you may be thinking that based on all this information about Bruce's union, that we need to add Arthur Huddle to our list. But he's not alive by the time Bruce is murdered. In 1931, Arthur Huddle is murdered in D.C. He's shot while dining at a restaurant with his 2 colleagues. He survives the shooting itself, but develops pneumonia and dies 10 days later at Sibley Hospital. So Huddle's not someone who would have been responsible for Bruce's murder, but he sets up someone who really could be, and that's William Maloney, who's only growing more and more suspicious as time passes. But I'm not sure that Maloney would have pulled the trigger. And that's why we need to know who in organized crime did Maloney begin affiliating himself with during this amalgamation process. Because I'm pretty sure it's whoever had his back through that process that is likely responsible for Bruce's murder. And that leads us to another question. Who is Maloney affiliated with? If he's the ringleader, potentially, who orders for Bruce's murder, who helps him? It's clear to me that the next step in this investigation is to find out who Maloney's contacts are in organized crime and who would have wanted money from the amalgamation process and therefore wanted Bruce dead for stopping it. Find out next time in The Racket.